So, early adopters, the best way to characterize them is their intent to always stay ahead of the herd. All of you would have a friend who loves to buy the latest gadget or the latest movie or the latest song, and sometimes show off or sometimes just for his own curiosity would like to be ahead of the peer group. That's a good signal of a early adopter. Uh, So, like innovators, early adopters tend to be ahead of everyone else, and they are very very willing to test the waters. They take the risk and they move ahead. Uh, the only difference is that their primary motivation is revolutionary breakthrough. They want to be characterized like that, and through that, if it's a enterprise product, they would like to gain dramatic competitive advantage. So that's why they would like to try out something completely new, right? So they have a great imagination for strategic application for different products that they are coming across. They will be attracted by high risk, high reward proposition. They will help supply the missing elements for your own development, for your product development, and they will help supply the I'm sorry, and they will also perceive the order of magnitude gains. So they can imagine that if I'm investing $100 and I'm getting $150, that's perfectly great. What are the challenges to attract this audience? They want rapid time to market. They really want to see things moving, and they demand high degree of customization and support because they want they're early adopters, so they would have a lot of suggestions, a lot of recommendations. They would like to see those recommendations, suggestions getting into the product, and that's why if you're designing the product at this stage and you have early adopters, make sure that you are adopting a product lifecycle or your product development process, which can rapidly ship features. Although early adopters are similar to innovators, there are some important differences, and I think the most important of them would be uh, that there is a good chance that the early adopters have purposely waited to buy a product, whereas innovators are fine with rushing in and testing out something completely new. Early adopters are a bit more hesitant. They still want to try something new, but they want a few reviews to consult. Then again, it could be the case that they should just found out about your product, right? So expect your percentage of adoption to go up to about 13.5% or so. The stage 3, the third stage, is early majority. Here's when your product really gets some momentum going. You've got a good amount of sales from innovators and early adopters. At this point, usually an even larger group sweeps in and gives you a heck of a lot more sales, specifically about 34%. The people in the early majority are usually pragmatic and will only buy something once. It's been road tested and has got some reviews, some feedback, which is to say it has proven its value. What is the primary motivation of an early majority mover? Well, they like to see or they want to gain sustainable productivity improvement, and they want to see evolutionary change. Revolutionary change is something that early adopters see. They want to see a step change in the way things are done. And early majority wants to see an evolution because they are too vested in their current setup that they do not want to move from it. Okay, and that's why they just want to see they just want to get an incremental improvement at whatever they're doing. What are the key characteristics of somebody who is in early majority? Well, they are typically astute managers of mission critical application. That's why they are not so willing to completely disrupt things. Okay, because they are mission critical applications. Or this could be just a regular consumer who is too used to an existing application. For example, uh, changing the to do app for someone who has already written a lot in the to do app and very used to how to do apps work, uh, that person would be very very skeptical of changing his to do application, for example, right? They understand the real world issues and trade offs, and they understand that the focus is on. I mean, their focus is on proven application. They don't want to try out completely new stuff, right? What are the challenges? The challenges are they insist on good references from trusted colleagues or reviews or sites or anything which they can trust, and they want to see the solution in production at the reference site. That is, they want to see the entire solution working. Okay, And they are the ones, the early majority are the ones who are responsible for getting in the mainstream market, right? And this is pretty much the beginning of your product's peak. Maybe it's gained traction with more marketing or word of mouth or something. What's the late majority? Late majority also has about 34% of your entire sales. And at this stage, your product has been out for a while and there is a widespread use. However, there are still some people who are a bit skeptical of a product. Once they have put their worries to test and rest, they buy a product. And these people are usually in the late majority or laggards. What is the primary motivation? They just want to stay even with the competition. They just want to avoid any competitive disadvantage. So competition is the primary motivation. So you can imagine that once you have sold enough in the early majority, early adopters, and you have reached late majority, selling or using your competition's logo or your competition's I mean your prospects competitors logo or messaging might work very well for you, right? What are the key characteristics? They are people, they're risk averse, they're price sensitive, and they're highly reliant on a single trusted advisor. Usually they're at that stage, right? And the challenges is when you're selling to them, the late majority, uh, they would expect the entire solution to work. Okay, they're just not comfortable with one thing not working, two thing not working. They want the entire thing, right? And they may also benefit from value added services, but they most likely will not like to pay. So you have to be very careful of what you're offering, what you're not offering, right? What is the key role in your entire game? You're in the entire game, your late majority's key role is to extend the product life cycle. Okay, so at some point during the early or late majority phase, you will have your peak where you get more sales than ever, and your product is at the height of its popularity. Interestingly, in terms of adoption rates, the early and late majorities are usually roughly equal, around 34%. Finally, laggards. These are the people who buy your product after all the hype has died down. Sometimes laggards purchase a product years after it's been released. Laggards might be extreme skeptics or people who have only heard about your product a long time after you launched it. Whatever the reason, these people don't buy until much later in the product lifecycle. What is the primary motivation? They just want to maintain the status quo. And because the product has already accepted or adopted in the widespread market, they just want to make sure that they are not too behind and they just want to use whatever benefit is available, right? What are the key characteristics? They are usually unmoved by the marketing hype. They disbelieve the productivity improvement arguments. If you're talking about your product is going to improve the productivity or is going to improve something, they will just disbelieve it, and they will typically believe in the law of unintended consequences, and they will like to take contrarian view. So they will be just the best devil's advocate you can ever get, and they seek to block purchase of new technology. They just do not want to experiment too much, right? And I think I'm sure Kodak would have a lot of laggards. The Kodak died a painful death, right? Because they just refuse to move, they just refuse to accept or move that something is changing, right? What are the challenges? They are not a customer. The laggards are obviously not a customer, so you have to expect a lot of opposition to any kind of adoption, right? So surprisingly, this laggards form a pretty big group. 16% of your product adoption will come from laggards. Try to wrap your head around the fact that laggards have a higher adoption rate than early adopters. It's weird, right? But don't worry, we're going to deep dive into laggards and how you can message them. But effectively, if you look at the entire spectrum, the five stages, it's not difficult to see how your messaging should change, how your approach towards building the product should change as you move from the different groups. And that is the reason why this curve and this the product lifecycle curve and the product adoption curve needs to be understood in this context properly, right? So let me give you a good example of how these five different characteristics of early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, and innovators, how this impact the messaging, right? As a product gets older, it will become more well known. right? Assuming you're playing the card right and your product is actually improving. So you might start out with a product no one knows, but end up with a product everyone and their brother has heard of. So given these facts, consider changing your marketing messages as your product ages. So here's a classic example, the iPhone. A commercial for the second generation iPhone showed off a lot of the hip new features: music, email, and internet browsing, to name a few. This obviously appealed to a younger, more tech savvy audience. Then in 2010, 3 years after the first iPhone launched in 2007, the iPhone 4 came out with a commercial that featured two grandparents celebrating their granddaughter's graduation. Apple wanted to show that even grandparents who may not have understood smartphones back in 2010 could benefit from the iPhone. This is important because older consumers are typically late adopters. Apple's strategy was clear: begin by showcasing all the bells and whistles, then open up the audience to include more types of customers. In the same way, you should think about what your marketing should look like at each stage of the product adoption curve. For example, when the innovators and early adopters come rolling in, your marketing should clearly describe the value and benefits of your product. Later on, perhaps in the late majority stage, you can utilize customer testimonials and reviews. This can help address the skepticism that later adopters you typically have. Think about addressing the common questions that each group has. Innovators will ask themselves, what's so unique about your product? While the early majority wants to know what other people think about your product and why it's useful. Thinking like this can completely change your marketing. By sending a customized message every step of the way, you will battle objections and questions head on. I'll just want to talk about one particular characteristic of this adoption curve, which is called the CASM. So, as impulse buyers, the innovators and early adopters didn't need huge reasons to buy your product. They were just impulse buyers, right? But to get the early majority to convert, that's exactly what you will need. You'll need good reasons. Okay. This chasm between early adopters and early majority is the death valley of most of the startups, most of the products. So you have to think about your branding and not just your product when you're moving from or trying to move from stage 2 to stage 3. You have to offer value and not just features. Another reason for the difficulty is the possible necessity of pivoting. In other words, to cross the chasm, you may need to take a new angle for your campaign. Early on, you may be hanging on the idea behind your product. That my idea is cool, it's so new, it's so unique. Early adopters are cool with that. But the early majority wants consistency. They want value. The CASP, the early majority does not talk to the early adopters, and that is why the CASP is created. And it's typically pretty huge. So huge that so many startups have died there. The early adopters are buying a revolutionary change agent. They expect clear strategic advantages and they tolerate bugs and glitches. While the early majority is buying evolutionary productivity improvement. So one is more on the revolutionary side, that we want step change, we want to adopt the latest and the greatest, while the early majority wants something consistent, something which is evolutionary and not revolutionary. There's a difference, right? And that's why they want to minimize the discontinuity with the old way. So early majority is happy with the current way and they just want to make a step change. They just want to improve a little bit, right? And that's why they want to minimize the discontinuity with the old way. They want innovations to enhance established business processes. Okay, what is working, and they just want innovations to enhance it. And they expect more or less bug-free product. They do not want very buggy product, and they will throw it out, right? So if you are at the cusp right now, you might need to pivot yourself or even improve your product. As you can imagine, right? These are completely two different audiences with two different expectations, and that's where the cusp is so tricky, right? So tricky that there's a best-selling book called Crossing the Chasm. It's a pretty good book, right? And by the way, don't forget the laggards. You can't stop after your product has hit its pinnacle and is riding the wave of success. Remember, the second largest adoption group is laggards, coming in at 16%. A lot of people will be buying your product well after the hype dies down, and you can't forget or alienate the audience. Laggards are often skeptics, so at the end of your product lifecycle, your marketing should be laser focused on overcoming objections. Think about it, you are marketing to people who resist change and may not even want to be a customer. They're going to need awesome reasons to invest in your brand. A slew of positive testimonials, reviews, press mentions, everything. Time also plays an important role. Think back to the iPhone example, right? Sure, older folks are commonly seen with iPhones, but it's been a decade since the device's initial release, right? So, in terms of enterprise products, this could mean that certain companies are content with the software they're using now. It might take a lot of time and exposure to your brand for them to change their minds. Finally, you will also need to brace for the declining sales that inevitably occur at the end of the product lifecycle. This is a natural part of the life cycle, but you still have to be ready for it. So, to conclude, the product adoption curve and the corresponding product life cycle is one of the most important concepts which are tricky to master but incredibly rewarding when you do. It is very difficult to identify when you have moved from innovators to early adopters and early adopters to early majority. But if you can understand that, if you can grab that, uh, the chances of your product succeeding is very high. Okay, it requires a lot of attention to your customers, a lot of listening and changing. It's not for the faint of heart. Okay, but creating an awesome product and having a successful launch isn't exactly a walk in the park either. If you're going to try to make a mark, you might as well go all the way, right? So knowing when, why, and how your customers adopt your product can revolutionize the way you see your product life cycles. You can plan ahead for each stage of the curve, and you'll be better equipped to adapt to any unforeseen changes. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this uh, course, understanding the product adoption curve is ultimately about knowing your customers and catering to them. You need to meet your potential customers where they are at every stage of the product life cycle, whether that means exciting the innovators or convincing the laggards. Correct? It can mean the difference between an okay product and an outstanding product. One last thing I would just want to highlight here is what I have been calling a product. This could very well be a normal feature in the entire app or entire website or whatever you're working on. And a lot of times you would have seen a feature is retired. When the product lives on, the feature is retired because the feature has been replaced with something much more suitable for now. That's it. And I'm sorry. Thank you so much, and see you in the next session.